Hey there, I'm Joe, and today I made a needle felt Dino Piranha Plant from Super Mario Galaxy. Stick around and I'll show you how I made this beautiful boy. As you can probably imagine, this was a very complex figure to make, and like anything complex, I decided to break it down into smaller parts, since it'd be easier to make them separately and attach them later. So I'm starting out with the body and this weird bulbous tail thing. The first thing I did was take some wool and I started laying it out across my mat. Now I want the fibers of the wool to get tangled up together, so I'm pulling it apart and laying it down in alternating directions. I'm then going to take the whole thing and ball it up together, and then finally felt it down. Now you want the core of your object to be fairly solid. A good rule of thumb I saw was you want it to feel like a tennis ball. And that takes so much time. Most of the time you're going to spend needle felting is going to be spent making the bases, adding more wool onto it, and just trying to get it to the right shape that you're looking for. Now they do make needle felting guns to make this a bit faster. It's a bit like a tattoo gun, but I don't have one. If this video does well enough, maybe I'll get one. I'm not sure. They're pretty expensive actually. They're almost as expensive as the new Switch 2 games. I'm probably not getting a Switch 2 though. I'm in fact purely coasting off of my great memories of the Wii. Nowadays I'm more of a PC gamer, but I really enjoyed a lot of the different things the Wii had to offer. As you can imagine, one of the games I really enjoyed was Super Mario Galaxy, and Galaxy 2, but I prefer the first one. Let me know which one you enjoyed more. Now I like the first one because I like the vibes of the main base a bit more than the Mario planet, which I thought was just a bit weird. I also loved a lot of the different enemies introduced in this series, which is why I'm making the Dino Piranha Plant. Anyway, once I had it to a firmness I was okay with, I could then start adding in more of the detail on the body. The Dino Piranha Plant has a lot of ridges along its stomach, and I can make that by needle felting in straight lines across the body to make little channels inside the wool. This is where the tennis ball analogy comes in pretty well, because it should be pliable enough it can still compress down and make these shapes, while still not being a rock, even though it probably won't get to that point. With the abs finally well defined, I can start working on the tail. Now I'm using some more wool to make the base nub of the tail. I'm then going to expand it outwards in the same way I made the body, so 3, 2, 1, there we go. If I showed you all the footage, this video would take 3 hours. So I started laying down the green for the back scales, I guess. Does he have scales? I mean, it's a plant, right? Anyway, I laid out a boundary of green wool in between where the stomach and the back is going to be. With that line being there, it's just a bit easier to know where I have to fill in the green. Once the back was filled in, I could then start taking that green and bringing it down the tail in order to make sure it's fully covered. Now technically, if you're going off the model, the bottom side of the tail should actually be yellow, but it's a bit fiddly so I just made it green. Sorry. Laying down a lot of wisps of green across the back of the tail, I can then quickly felt it all down to make a nice cohesive color. With that finished, I can begin working on the stomach. Now I'm taking an off yellow color that I have, laying it out and felting that down, making sure to keep the overall shape intact. Now here I switch to a thinner, lighter needle. That way it doesn't affect the overall structure too much, but I can still felt it down enough so that the yellow doesn't come apart from the body. I am taking that yellow and bringing it slightly down on the tail, even though, again, it's technically meant to go all the way down, but it's a bit fiddly working on the tail, so, sorry. With that done, I can begin working on the club part of the tail. Taking some wool and forming a ball. I can then form lines into the ball by needle felting, kind of like the body, in straight sections. And pretty soon I can turn this sphere into an almost garlic looking club. Now it's not really meant to look like garlic, but before I add any color, I am going to attach it to the body because I think it'll be a bit easier to add the color afterwards. I kept this white part on the tail to stretch around the club, I'm then going to felt the little wisps at the end into the ball, making sure it's stable, and once I know it's not going to easily rip off, I can start adding a lighter brown. Now I'm going clove by clove, because part of needle felting is the texture. If I give each separate section its own bit of wool and I don't make a crossover, it'll look like separate sections. With the tail fully brown, our piece of garlic now looks like an onion, and so I can start adding the darker line in between all the different sections. And with that line in place, it means I now have the body and tail finished. I can now move on to making the next part of the project, which is going to be the legs. Started out by making a hemisphere and another shape that I don't really have a name for. Now these are eventually going to attach together to form the leg, but first I have to give both of them a green outer shell to blend it in with the body. Starting with the lower part of the foot, I gave it a nice exoskeleton of green. And once that was fully covered, I moved on to the upper leg. Now, to a certain degree, I could have kept some of it white because it'd be pressed up against the body, but I figured I should make the whole thing green just in case anything sticks out in the end. Once I had the upper part of the leg and the bottom part of the leg, I could then attach them. I took some green wool, felted that down into the top part of the foot, and once that was fully attached, I can then wrap that wool up around the upper leg, and I can then felt the two pieces together. Now, I do want this thing to stand up on its own, and I figure because it has a tail and it has two kinda sturdy legs, it'll be like a tripod, so it should balance itself out and stand up. With a leg done, they need some toes. I guess they're more claws than toes, but same difference. Here, I'm taking some white wool, wrapping it around itself, and then felting it down into the mat. With one claw completed, I then needed a few more. And with these claws, I could start attaching them to the feet. I tried putting the first toe directly in the middle of where the foot's gonna be, and then offsetting them 15 degrees for the other two toes. I felted them down quite a bit, but because they're not load-bearing, they shouldn't ever be put under too much strain. Now I have one leg done, but he obviously needs two. And with that, he can finally stand up on his own. Which means I can move on to making the arms. Or leaves, I guess. I'm laying out some green, yellow, and an orange wool flat on the mat in roughly the shape I want. Now, there's actually a lot of shapes leaves come in, and I didn't fully think about it, but it makes sense that they all have names. I'm going to felt this sheet down into the mat, rip it off, flip it over, and felt it down again to make sure it's a solid object. Now, it doesn't have to be super sturdy just because it's not load-bearing to anything, but I still want to make sure it is cohesive to itself. So I continue to flip it over, add some more wool as needed, and I keep felting it down until it stays together. Now I need this leaf to be kind of spiky, so I'm taking a thinner needle and felting along the edge until it has a bit of spikiness to it. And I didn't fully like it, it wasn't big enough, so instead I'm going to take some more wool and add on to it to build out the spikes. Using orange wool, I made some triangles along the edge, and I do have to say, it looks a lot closer to what I was trying to get to originally. For me, the multicolored leaves and the petals really separate it from the other versions of the Piranha Plant. Now, I'm not too sure why Mario wants to square up with a baby, especially when he woke him up, but I'm very thankful that Nintendo graced us with this amazing design. Pretty soon, I finished off this leaf arm, and through the power of movie magic, here's two of them. Now, I'm not going to attach these directly. I'm going to take the very bottom edge, fold it over itself, and felt that together to give it a bit more structure. I'm going to eventually use these little flanges to attach it to the body. And with these done, I would consider the arms completed, which means I can finally move on to the next piece, which is going to be the head. I'm starting by forming a hemisphere that's going to make up the back part of the head. Now eventually this is going to be a little Pac-Man head, but like earlier, I need it to be a bit sturdier, kind of like a tennis ball, in order for it to more easily accept the new wool. After I made the initial hemisphere, I started packing on more wool towards the bottom jaw, and after I fully formed the bottom jaw, I started adding even more wool to form the top. Pretty soon the jaw was done, but it still doesn't look fully right, so I think the next thing I'm going to make is the lips. I laid out some wool in the same width I want the lip to eventually be and rolled it up into a long tube. After that, I started felting the tube down into a solid object. And of course, once I had that, I wanted to make sure that it would fit onto the head. So grabbing the head, laying it out, and it looks like it's perfect. Now once I made the first one, off camera, I made a second one. With these two lips, I can now start coloring all the head. Taking some green, laying down an initial layer, wrapping it around the tube, and then felting it down fully, I can pretty quickly make a green worm that is soon going to end up being the lip of this Dino Piranha. With one, I can then very quickly make two. And with two, I can finally attach them to the head. Now I left the white parts on the edges so I'd have something to felt into the actual head part. To make sure it's one cohesive unit, I felted along the inner edge of the lips into the mouth. That way it would stay together and anchor it down. Once I had the bottom part of the jaw installed, I started installing the upper lip. And once that was fully in place, I then had to take some more green and lay it over the exposed white spots, just to make sure they were fully green. Once that was finished, I then had to work on the inside of the mouth. Luckily, I had some red left over from when I made the Eye of Cthulhu and the inner part of its mouth. Just like that project, I'm taking that red, making sure I spread it all across the innards, and felting it down. You're gonna have to take my word on this, my fingers block all the footage I got. With that done, I can move on to making the tongue. To make it, I took some white wool, made it tongue-shaped, and wrapped it in a layer of red. Once that was there, I took some darker red wool, made a little line throughout it, and then once it was finished, I could attach it into the mouth. Same way as you attach everything, I felted it down, which meant I stabbed it a bunch into the back of the mouth until it finally stuck there. With that finished, I can finally move on to coloring the rest of this Dino Piranha, starting with the pink around the top of the head. I had this pink magenta wool, which was very lucky because it looks like the same color as the actual Dino Piranha. Do not look it up, take my word for it. I was really just trying to make sure there was an even layer going across the entire back of the head of this pink color that I have. Now, when I looked at it, it looked very uneven, but according to the official plush, I think I'm actually fine. Now here, I'm adding the white dots that appear across the head. Pretty simple, taking some white wool, putting it on the thing, and forming mostly circle shapes. Needle felting needles are made of metal, and they're pretty strong in one direction, but if you twist them enough, you end up breaking them, and it is tragic. But I did finish off the head, so it's time to start making the petals. I'm making them in the same way I made the arms. I'm first laying out some yellow wool, making sure it's fairly thick because this is going to be a bit more noticeable. And I'm then adding some red wool along the outer edge to give it the gradient color scale. Once it was there, it was as simple as felting it down into the mat, and then once it was solid enough, I would pull it off, flip it over, and felt the other side. As you can imagine, this took so long. And again, I don't have the automatic needle felter, so please subscribe if you're enjoying this and you think it's cool, because it'll very much help me justify how much time I spend stabbing wool alone by myself in my room. And I thank you all very much for joining me on this journey so far. Right now, the petals are a bit too pointy, so I'm going to take the upper edge, fold it back on itself, and felt that down in order to make it have a curved edge. Now, because this is needle felting and I didn't use a separate thing for the base, that took the most time. But doing small details like these over and over and over again also takes a very long time. Not complaining, I enjoy doing it, but there's just a lot of footage I have of me making all these petals. And now that they're made, I can finally attach them to the head. Laying them down on the head, I'm felting along the bottom edge to make sure they stick. And once they're felted from that first direction, I fold it over itself and felt going the opposite way, just to make sure it's really going to stay in there. Now with this first petal done, I can then move on to the second one. And pretty soon after that, I can attach the third one. And so at this point, I realized there was something wrong. You see, the actual petals are also kind of spiky, and they're round here. So I'm going to felt into the edge to give it a different shape. Now, I'm really going to poke my finger if I do this, but luckily they make finger protectors. Now these are made of leather. You put them over your fingers, and then it doesn't hurt as much if you stab into yourself. You can actually hit yourself lightly and it'll be fine. Now, I don't use them because for how heavy my hand is, if I'm needle felting, it's going right through. You can see how much it'll pierce your finger, but luckily the bone does stop it. Now, they're very useful if you want to hold something in between your fingers like I'm doing here and felting it down. By doing this along the edge, it pushes that specific area in. That way, it changes the shape. And once I did this, I had to do it for all the other ones, and even the ones I already attached. Using the same gloves and the same technique, I started felting down along the edges until all the petals were properly spiky. With the ones on the head having the correct attitude, I could now start attaching the rest of them. I made sure to leave a gap so I could connect the head to the actual body, which meant the petals went underneath the lips, kind of like a chin strap. Now, if you're a viewer of my shorts, you might be wondering why it took so long to do this, and frankly, it's because these petals took a long time. Now, looking at the back of the head, unfortunately, a lot of the dots got covered up, so I took some more wool and redid them. Very quickly, I had new dots, which meant the head was completed, which meant I could finally move on to attaching it to the body. Finally, in all of its glory, here are all the different parts I made. I want it to stand up eventually. It'll look something like this. So I think the first step is to attach the legs onto the body. That way it can stand up, and I can at least see if my plan worked. I'm going to attach the leg to the body in the same way I attach the bottom of the leg to the upper part. Using some green wool, I'm ripping it apart. I'm then attaching it to the inner part of the thigh, where that's going to connect with the body. And then after that's there, I'm attaching more green wool over the side of the thigh to help it all stick into the body. When I first started needle felting, I assumed having a squishy core helped these pieces stick together, but you'll actually want firm pieces. There's more fibers in there to get tangled, which means these legs are actually very well attached to the actual body. Now, because I'm moving all this wool around, a couple of bald spots appear here and there. You can just add more wool on top, and they very quickly disappear, just like they were never there. With one leg attached and fairly sturdy, I'm starting on the second one. With the same method of attachment, these two legs are finally there, and I like to say, very sturdy. Sturdy enough to hopefully stand up on their own. Now, it's very much using the tail as a counterbalance, but I think when I add the head, it should stand up even better. Using the extra big lip I left on the back of the two arms, I can felt that wide area into the body, which means it should stick together fairly well, even though the arms are pretty flimsy otherwise. Once both of them were secured, I took a look at my piece so far, and I loved it already. But it's not nearly finished though. I have to figure out how to attach the head. Around the white spot, I laid out some green wool and that more yellow wool along the front of the neck. This way, I would have more area and more wool to attach into the head. Since I don't respect pop collars in this house, I'm going to felt it down and turn it into the neck. Now here, I'm felting at a pretty steep angle initially, just to make sure that outer layer of wool is connected. Afterwards, I'm felting at a much more shallow angle to make sure the body fibers get entangled with the fibers of the head. Pretty soon, it's attached, and I love him, but I realized something was missing. Making a few more sharpened white tubes, I added the spikes along his back, and upon seeing the stark contrast of the white and the green, I realized, you know, he's gonna look a lot better if I take away this gummy smile and give him a set of pearly whites. So that's what I did. Folding over some white wool on itself, I made a little triangle, felted it down into a tooth shape, and this is going to be more of a 2D element in the 3D space. So once I finished that, I popped it into its mouth, and I felted it down in between the red and green parts of his gums. And I didn't like it. It was a bit too big. It's fine, you can just pull it out, cut it down a bit with some scissors, and reattach it into the lip part, which sounds weird but actually looks a lot nicer. The mouth is where your voice comes from. It's where music comes from. I want to talk about the music in Super Mario Galaxy. Like a lot of Nintendo games, it is banger after banger after banger, and I have to say I would love to play it in the background, but Nintendo scares me. I'm already kind of pushing it by making this guy, so instead enjoy the Stardew Valley music. Now that he finally has the teeth of pearly white chompers, and I do think it was the right choice adding it, he has his tail, which accurately hits the back of his head. He's got his feet, spines, arms, petals. I think it's finally time to show off the glamour shots. Whether you watched through the whole video or just skipped to the end, I want to say thank you very much for watching this. I really enjoyed making it. It took way longer than I thought. I legitimately did have 3 hours of footage at one point, and I have a lot of footage of some other stuff that I've already made, so there are more videos in the works already. I hope you stick around to watch them. If there are any other topics or things you'd like to see me make, please leave them in the comments, and let me know what you think of this guy. And I guess one final time, thank you for watching, please subscribe, leave a like, and have a great rest of your day.